I pulled into the parking lot of Bayou Correctional Facility on a humid Monday morning, sweat already sticking my shirt to my back. The gravel crunched under my tires as I found a spot between a rusted pickup and a dented sedan. I sat there for a minute, engine ticking as it cooled, staring at the concrete walls topped with razor wire. This wasn't where I'd planned to be at 35. 6 months ago, I'd been running my own construction crew, decent money, my own boss. Then the housing market dried up and the bank came calling. Now here I was, desperate for steady work, about to become a prison guard. The pay was good though, real good, nearly double what I'd been making on the best construction months. Rosie had tried to hide her relief when I told her about the job, but I'd seen it in her eyes. We had 2 kids and a mortgage. Pride didn't pay bills. I grabbed my lunch from the passenger seat and walked toward the main entrance. The building looked like it had been here since the 70s, all brown brick and narrow windows. A sign by the door read, Bayou Correctional Facility, Capacity 200. Below that, someone had scratched Abandon Hope into the metal, then tried to sand it off. You Bill Russell? I turned to see a man walking toward me from the parking lot. He was maybe 45, lean build, graying brown hair. His corrections uniform looked like it had seen better days, and his face had the kind of lines that came from too much worry, not enough sleep. That's me. Jim Thornton. I'll be training you this week. He stuck out his hand. His grip was firm, but his skin felt rough, like he'd been working with his hands for years before this job. Good to meet you. Jim nodded toward the entrance. We better get moving. Shift starts at 7 sharp, and Williams doesn't like people being late. Williams. Warden. You'll meet her soon enough. We walked toward the building together. Up close, the place looked even more worn down. Paint peeling around the doorframe, cracks in the concrete steps. The kind of place that ate up maintenance budgets and never looked any better for it. So, you worked construction? Jim asked as we reached the door. Yeah, had my own crew for about 8 years. Market went south. Happens. This work's different though, real different. Something in his tone made me look at him. He was staring straight ahead, jaw set tight. Different how? Jim stopped walking. He reached into his shirt pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper, yellow around the edges like it had been handled a lot. Before we go in, you need to read this. I took the paper and unfolded it. 7 rules written in careful handwriting, black ink. 1. Never work alone after sunset. Always have another guard within sight. 2. If an inmate asks you to deliver a message to someone outside, refuse and report it immediately. 3. Do not enter cell block C between midnight and 3 a.m. for any reason. 4. If you hear singing from an empty cell, walk away. Do not investigate. 5. Always carry blessed holy water. Check that your bottle is full at the start of each shift. 6. If an inmate's eyes turn completely black, do not make direct eye contact. Back away slowly and call for backup. 7. Trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, it probably is. I read through the list twice, then looked up at Jim. He wasn't smiling. This some kind of initiation thing? No. Come on, blessed holy water, black eyes. This sounds like something from a horror movie. Jim's expression didn't change. I wish it was. I folded the paper and started to hand it back to him, but he shook his head. Keep it, you'll need it. Look, I appreciate the welcome wagon, but can we skip to the real orientation material? I need to learn the actual procedures, not this Stephen King stuff. Jim grabbed my arm. His fingers dug in hard enough that I felt it through my sleeve. Listen to me real careful, Bill. This isn't a joke. These rules aren't some prank we play on new guys. You follow them exactly, or you won't survive your first week. I looked down at his hand on my arm, then back at his face. His gray eyes were dead serious. No hint of humor, no sign he was putting me on, just grim certainty. You're serious. Dead serious. I studied his face for another few seconds, the lines around his eyes, the tight set of his mouth, the way his shoulders stayed tense. Whatever this was about, Jim believed it completely. "Okay," I said, "I'll keep the list." Jim let go of my arm and nodded. "Good, now let's get you processed." The front entrance led into a small lobby with fluorescent lights that hummed too loud and gray linoleum that had seen better decades. A receptionist sat behind bulletproof glass, reading a romance novel. She looked up when we walked in. "Morning, Jim. This the new guy?" "Bill Russell, starting today." She slid a clipboard through the slot in the glass. "Fill these out, ID and social security card." I spent the next 20 minutes filling out forms while Jim waited. Basic stuff mostly. Emergency contacts, medical history, next of kin. The kind of paperwork that made everything feel official and permanent. When I finished, the receptionist buzzed us through a heavy steel door into the main facility. The first thing that hit me was the smell. Disinfectant and sweat and something else I couldn't identify. Something stale and sour. "Metal detector first," Jim said, pointing to an archway ahead of us. I emptied my pockets into a plastic tray and walked through. The machine stayed quiet. Jim collected a radio and a set of keys from a guard station, then handed me a temporary radio. "You'll get your own equipment once you pass the week," he said. We walked down a long corridor lined with doors. Each one had a small window and a number. The walls were painted institutional green, the kind of color that was supposed to be calming but just looked depressing. "How many inmates?" I asked. 200 on a full day. Right now, we're at about 180. Mix of everything. Theft, assault, drug charges. Some waiting for trial, some serving time." "And how many guards?" 6 per shift. Sometimes 5 if someone calls in sick." I did the math in my head. 30 or 40 inmates per guard. Those weren't great odds if things went sideways. "Seems like you'd want more staff," Jim snorted. "State budget doesn't care what we want. We make do with what we get." We passed through another checkpoint, this one manned by a guard who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. He nodded at Jim and looked me over without much interest. "New meat," Jim told him. "Good luck," the guard said. He didn't sound like he meant it. The main corridor opened into a central area with stairs leading up to a second floor. I could see cell doors along both levels, metal railings, more of that green paint. The noise hit me then, voices echoing off concrete, footsteps, the clang of metal doors. It wasn't loud exactly, but it was constant. The sound of 200 people living in a space that wasn't meant to be comfortable. "Breakfast shift's starting," Jim said, checking his watch. "Good time for you to see how meals work." We walked toward what looked like a cafeteria area. Long tables, plastic chairs, a serving line behind steel barriers. A dozen inmates were already lined up, wearing orange jumpsuits. They looked tired mostly. A few talked quietly among themselves, but most just stood there waiting. "Count's the most important thing," Jim said as we watched. "Every meal, every shift change, every movement. We always know exactly how many inmates we have and where they are." A guard at the serving line was checking names off a list as inmates got their trays. Eggs that looked like rubber, toast, something that might have been hash browns, the kind of food that filled you up without costing much. "Fights ever break out during meals?" I asked. "Sometimes. Usually over stupid stuff. Someone cuts in line, someone takes someone else's seat. Mostly we can shut it down before it gets serious." I watched the inmates move through the line. They looked normal enough. Tired, maybe a little beaten down by the system, but normal. Not like the monsters the rules in my pocket were warning me about. "Jim, about that list you gave me." "What about it?" "The holy water thing. Where exactly am I supposed to get blessed holy water?" Jim reached into his other pocket and pulled out a small plastic bottle, the kind you'd put travel shampoo in. The liquid inside was clear. "Father Pierce at St. Mary's blesses a batch every month. I'll introduce you this week." I took the bottle and turned it over in my hands. It felt like regular water. Looked like regular water. And I'm supposed to carry this around because it works. Works for what? Jim was quiet for a long moment, watching the inmates get their breakfast. His jaw worked like he was chewing over what to say. You'll understand soon enough. For now, just keep it with you. Check it's full at the start of every shift, like the list says. I clipped the bottle to my belt next to the radio. It felt ridiculous, like carrying a lucky rabbit's foot or something. But Jim's expression told me this wasn't the time to argue about it. The breakfast line was moving smoothly, no fights, no problems. Just tired men getting bad food and shuffling to tables to eat it. Normal prison stuff, far as I could tell. How long you been working here? I asked Jim. 12 years. Ever think about doing something else? Jim looked at me then, and something passed across his face. Something that might have been regret. Every day. But someone's got to do this job. Might as well be someone who knows the rules. The way he said it made me think there was more to that story. But before I could ask, his radio crackled. Jim, you copy? Jim unclipped the radio. Copy. Warden wants to see you and the new guy in her office. On our way. Jim clipped the radio back to his belt and nodded toward the stairs. Time to meet Williams. We walked back through the main corridor and up a flight of stairs to the administrative level. The noise from the cells faded some, but you could still hear it. Always there in the background. The warden's office was at the end of the hall, behind a door with frosted glass. Jim knocked and waited. Come in. Warden Williams was a woman in her 50s with gray hair pulled back tight and eyes that looked like they'd seen everything twice. Her desk was covered with paperwork, and she had the kind of tired expression that came from fighting budget battles and state bureaucracy. Bill Russell, she said, standing up to shake my hand. Welcome to Bayou Correctional. Thank you, ma'am. Jim's one of our best trainers. You listen to him, you'll do fine here. She sat back down and picked up a folder. I see you worked construction before this. Yes, ma'am. 8 years running my own crew. Good. This job requires someone who can handle responsibility. We run a tight facility here, Mr. Russell. Professional by the book. I expect my guards to maintain order and follow procedures at all times. Understood. She looked at Jim. He's cleared for all areas except the restricted sections. Standard training schedule? Yes, ma'am. Good. She turned back to me. The pay here is competitive because the work isn't easy. We ask a lot of our people, but if you're reliable and you follow the rules, you'll have steady employment and good benefits. I thought about Rosie and the kids, about the mortgage payment due next week. I appreciate the opportunity. Jim will show you the rest of the facility. Any questions, ask him first. If he can't answer them, come see me. We left the office and headed back downstairs. The breakfast shift was winding down, inmates clearing their trays and heading back to their cells. The routine looked smooth, practiced, like everyone knew their role and played it without thinking. She seems all right, I said as we walked. Williams is fair, tough but fair, been here about 5 years. Cleaned up a lot of problems the last warden left behind. We spent the next hour walking through the facility. Jim showed me the cell blocks, the exercise yard, the medical unit, the visitor area. It looked like every prison I'd ever seen in movies. Concrete and steel and narrow spaces designed to keep people contained. But something felt off. I couldn't put my finger on it exactly. Maybe it was the way some of the guards moved, always checking over their shoulders. Maybe it was how quiet the inmates got when we walked past certain sections. Or maybe it was just the building itself, the way shadows seemed deeper than they should be, the way some corridors felt colder than others. That's cell block C, Jim said as we passed a corridor blocked off with yellow tape, closed for maintenance. I remembered the list in my pocket. Rule number 3. Do not enter cell block C between midnight and 3 a.m. for any reason. What kind of maintenance? Electrical problems. Should be fixed soon. Jim kept walking, but I noticed he didn't look down that corridor, didn't even glance in that direction. We finished the tour back at the main guard station. Jim showed me how to log shift changes, how to use the radio codes, how to fill out the incident reports. Basic stuff, but important. The kind of procedures that kept a place like this running. "Questions so far?" he asked. I had about 100 questions, most of them about the list in my pocket. But Jim's expression told me this wasn't the time for that conversation. "I think I'm getting the hang of it." "Good. Tomorrow we'll start you on actual duties. Meal supervision, cell checks, yard duty. Nothing complicated at first." The morning shift was ending. Other guards were checking out, heading home to whatever normal lives they had outside these walls. I watched them go and wondered what stories they could tell, what they'd seen working here, what they'd learned to live with. "Jim," I said as we walked back toward the entrance, "the pay here, it really is almost double what most places offer." "Yeah. Why's that?" Jim stopped walking. He looked at me for a long moment, then at the walls around us, then back at me. "High turnover," he said finally. "Hard to keep good people." "Because of the work conditions?" "Because of the work." We reached the parking lot. The sun was higher now, beating down on the asphalt. My car looked like it belonged in a different world, a normal world where people worried about normal things. "See you tomorrow," Jim said. 7 sharp. "I'll be here." Jim started toward his truck, then stopped and turned back. "Bill, that list I gave you. I know it sounds crazy, but I've been here 12 years. I've seen things that don't make sense. Lost good people who didn't follow the rules." I pulled the folded paper from my pocket and looked at it again. 7 rules that read like something from a ghost story. "What kind of things?" Jim was quiet for so long I thought he wasn't going to answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "The kind of things that make you understand why the pay's so good." He got in his truck and drove away, leaving me standing in the parking lot with more questions than answers. I looked back at the prison, at those concrete walls and narrow windows, and wondered what exactly I'd gotten myself into. The money was good though, real good. And Rosie was counting on this job working out. I folded the list and put it back in my pocket, right next to the bottle of holy water that felt heavier than it should. I got through my second day without any major problems. Jim had me working cell block C on the afternoon shift while he supervised block D. The place felt different when you were alone, quieter but not in a good way. Every sound seemed louder, every shadow looked deeper. The inmates mostly kept to themselves. A few tried to start conversations, but I remembered what Jim said about messages and kept my responses short. Professional. Most of them seemed normal enough, just guys doing their time, reading, playing cards, writing letters, nothing too strange. At exactly 2 o'clock, the radio crackled to life. "Attention all units, we have a deceased inmate in cell block C, cell 47. Tyler Watkins is deceased. Repeat, Tyler Watkins in cell 47 is deceased." I stopped walking. The voice was calm, matter-of-fact, like they were announcing lunch. I looked down the corridor toward cell 47. It was about 30 feet away, 3rd cell on the left. I remembered the first rule from Jim's list: never work alone after sunset. But it was only 2 in the afternoon, and this wasn't about working alone. This was about a dead inmate. I walked to cell 47 and peered through the small window in the door. Tyler Watkins lay on his bunk, perfectly still. He was on his back, arms at his sides, eyes closed. He looked peaceful. No signs of struggle, no blood, nothing violent, just dead. I pulled out my radio. "Control, this is Russell in Block C. I've confirmed the deceased inmate in cell 47. Tyler Watkins appears to be deceased." "Copy that, Russell. Warden Williams and the medical examiner are en route. Secure the cell and wait for their arrival." I checked the lock on the cell door. It was solid. I stood there and waited, watching Tyler Watkins through the window. He didn't move, didn't breathe, just lay there like he was sleeping, except for the stillness that only comes with death. Warden Williams arrived 15 minutes later with a thin man in a white coat carrying a medical bag. She nodded at me. "Any signs of distress? Violence?" she asked. "No, ma'am. Just found him like this when the call came in." She looked through the window herself, then stepped back. "Dr. Morrison will handle the examination. You can return to your rounds." I walked back down the corridor, but I could hear them unlocking the cell behind me. The other inmates had gone quiet. That happened sometimes when someone died. Word traveled fast in a place like this. 20 minutes later, they wheeled Tyler Watkins out on a gurney with a white sheet over him. The warden and doctor followed, talking in low voices. I couldn't make out what they were saying. The rest of my shift was uneventful. No one mentioned Tyler Watkins. No one seemed particularly upset or surprised. In prison, I guess death was just another part of the routine. Thursday morning, I was back in Block C. Jim was training me on meal distribution when the radio crackled again. "Attention all units, we have a deceased inmate in cell block C, cell 31. Marcus Thompson is deceased. Repeat, Marcus Thompson in cell 31 is deceased." It was exactly 2 o'clock again. Same calm voice, same matter-of-fact tone. Jim didn't even look up from the meal cart. "Go check it," he said. "Same procedure as yesterday." I walked to cell 31. Marcus Thompson was lying on his bunk, arms at his sides, eyes closed. Same peaceful expression as Tyler Watkins. Same unnatural stillness. I radioed it in. Warden Williams and Dr. Morrison arrived. Same examination, same white sheet, same quiet conversation as they wheeled him out. "This happen often?" I asked Jim when they were gone. He shrugged. "Often enough. Natural causes, mostly. Stress, poor health, bad living conditions. These guys don't exactly take care of themselves." But Marcus Thompson had looked healthy yesterday. Young guy, maybe 35. No obvious health problems. Friday brought another announcement, 2 o'clock sharp. "Attention all units. We have a deceased inmate in cell block A, cell 18. David Cruz is deceased. Repeat, David Cruz in cell 18 is deceased." I was in block C, so I didn't see that one. But I heard the same routine playing out. Radio confirmation, medical examiner, body removal. The whole process took about an hour. Saturday was my day off, but when I came back Sunday, Jim told me 3 more inmates had died over the weekend. All at 2 o'clock, all found peacefully in their cells. 6 deaths in 5 days, I said. "That seem normal to you?" Jim looked at me for a long moment. "Define normal. I mean, is there some kind of epidemic going around? Disease outbreak? Something in the water?" Dr. Morrison runs tests on all of them. Natural causes every time. Heart failure, stroke, that kind of thing. Nothing contagious. But the other guards didn't seem worried about an epidemic. They didn't wear masks or take extra precautions. They just went about their business like nothing was happening. Like losing an inmate every day was perfectly routine. Monday brought another death. Tuesday, another, always at 2 o'clock. Always the same peaceful scene. Always natural causes, according to Dr. Morrison. I started paying attention to the pattern. The radio would crackle. The same calm voice would announce a deceased inmate. I'd go check the cell, confirm the death, and wait for the medical team. The body would be removed within an hour. The inmates didn't seem surprised either. No one asked questions. No one demanded answers. They just accepted it as part of prison life. By Wednesday, I'd seen 8 dead inmates in 7 working days. All different ages, all different backgrounds. The only thing they had in common was that peaceful expression and the 2 o'clock timing. I thought about asking Warden Williams about it, but what would I say? That I thought 8 natural deaths in 7 days was suspicious? She'd probably tell me the same thing Jim did, that prison was hard on people, that stress and poor health led to early deaths. Thursday afternoon, I was doing my rounds in Block C when the radio crackled again. 2 o'clock, right on schedule. "Inmate deceased, cell 23, Block C." The radio announcement came through clear as always. 2 o'clock on the dot. I was already in Block C, maybe 40 feet from Cell 23, so I walked over to check. Cell 23 sat on the right side of the corridor, fourth door down. I approached the small window in the metal door and looked inside, expecting to see the same thing I'd witnessed 8 times before. A peaceful body on the bunk, arms at the sides, eyes closed. But Johnny Bradley wasn't lying down. He sat on the edge of his bunk, facing the door. His black hair hung loose around his face, and when he looked up at me through the window, his eyes were normal, brown, maybe hazel. Hard to tell in the dim light. "Hey there, officer," he said. His voice sounded normal too, not friendly but not threatening either. I stepped back from the window. The radio had announced him dead, but Johnny Bradley was very much alive, talking, moving, breathing. I keyed my radio. "Control, this is Russell in Block C. I'm at Cell 23. The inmate appears to be alive." Static crackled for a few seconds. Then Control's voice came back. "Copy that, Russell. Medical team is en route. Maintain position." Through the window, I could see Johnny still sitting on his bunk. He'd picked up a paperback book from beside him and started reading. Just like that. Like nothing had happened. I stood there watching him turn pages. The whole thing felt wrong. 9 deaths in 8 days, all at 2 o'clock. All natural causes, according to Dr. Morrison. But this time the radio was wrong, or someone had made a mistake. Johnny looked up from his book and caught me staring. He smiled. Not a friendly smile. The kind of smile that made my skin crawl. "You're new," he said through the door. "I can tell. You've got that look." I didn't respond. Jim had told me not to engage with inmates beyond basic instructions. Keep conversations short and professional. "I've been watching you this week," Johnny continued. "Walking your rounds, checking on the dead ones. You're starting to figure it out, aren't you?" "Figure what out?" The words came out before I could stop them. Johnny's smile got wider. "That this place isn't normal. That something's not right here. You've seen the pattern by now. 2 o'clock every day. Same peaceful faces. Same natural causes." I felt cold suddenly. The kind of cold that comes from inside, not from the air conditioning. "They weren't really dead when you found them," Johnny said. "Not yet, but they would be soon. The radio just announced it a little early." My hand moved to the holy water bottle clipped to my belt. I didn't know why, just instinct. Johnny noticed the movement. His eyes tracked down to my belt, then back up to my face. The smile disappeared. "You've got one of those bottles," he said. His voice had changed, gotten quieter, more focused. "Jim gave it to you, didn't he? Told you it was blessed by Father Pierce." I took another step back from the door. "It won't help you," Johnny said. "Not really. It might buy you a few seconds, but that's all. The things in this place are stronger than some priest's blessing." "Control, where's that medical team?" I spoke into my radio, not taking my eyes off Johnny. "Medical team is 2 minutes out," Control responded. Johnny laughed, a low, ugly sound. "Medical team? That's funny. Dr. Morrison's going to come in here and check my pulse and announce that I died of natural causes. Heart failure, probably. Or maybe a stroke. He's got a whole list of explanations." I heard footsteps in the corridor behind me. Heavy boots on concrete. I turned and saw Warden Williams walking toward me with Dr. Morrison. Same routine as always. "What's the situation, Russell?" Williams asked as she approached. "The inmate appears to be alive, ma'am. He's been talking to me." Williams frowned. She moved to the window and looked inside. I watched her face change. Her eyebrows went up and she stepped back from the door. "He's sitting up," she said to Dr. Morrison. Dr. Morrison moved to the window. He looked inside for about 10 seconds, then pulled back with a puzzled expression. "That's unusual," he said. "The radio announced him deceased." "Maybe there was a mistake," I said. Williams keyed her radio. "Control, this is Williams. Who called in the death for Cell 23? "Automated system, ma'am. Same as always." "Automated system?" I looked at Williams. "What automated system?" She ignored my question. Dr. Morrison, I need you to examine the inmate. Make sure he's all right. Dr. Morrison nodded. Williams pulled out her keys and unlocked cell 23. The door swung open with a metallic clang. Johnny was still sitting on his bunk, still holding his book. He looked up at us with those normal brown eyes. "Afternoon, Warden," he said politely. "Doctor." "Mr. Bradley," Williams said. "How are you feeling?" "Fine, ma'am. Just reading." He held up the paperback. Some kind of Western novel. Dr. Morrison stepped into the cell. "I need to check your vital signs. Make sure everything's normal." "Sure thing, Doc." I stayed in the doorway while Dr. Morrison pulled out his stethoscope. He listened to Johnny's chest, checked his pulse, looked in his eyes with a small flashlight. "Heart rate's normal," Dr. Morrison said. "Breathing's normal. Pupils are responsive." "I told you I was fine," Johnny said. He was still smiling that cold smile. Williams looked confused. In all the deaths I'd witnessed, the inmates had been found already dead. This was different. The radio had announced a death that hadn't happened yet. "Must have been a system error," Williams said finally. "Dr. Morrison, note that the inmate is alive and healthy. No medical intervention required." Dr. Morrison packed up his equipment. "Will do." They turned to leave. I started to follow them out of the cell. That's when Johnny's hand shot through the gap and grabbed my wrist. His grip was like a vice, stronger than any human grip should be. His fingers wrapped around my wrist and squeezed, and I felt like my bones might break. I looked down at his hand. His skin was ice cold against mine, cold like touching a block of ice. And his fingernails had grown longer, sharp. They dug into my skin. I looked back at his face. His eyes weren't brown anymore. They were completely black. No pupils, no iris, no white. Just solid black from edge to edge. "Let me out," he whispered. His voice had changed too. It sounded like gravel grinding together, like something scraping against concrete. "Let me out and I'll make it quick." I tried to pull away, but his grip tightened. The cold from his skin spread up my arm. It felt like frostbite, like my skin was burning from the cold. "Help!" I yelled. "Help me!" Williams and Dr. Morrison had already left the cell. They were halfway down the corridor, talking quietly. They didn't hear me. Johnny's grip tightened more. I could feel something happening to my skin where he touched me. It felt like it was burning, but from cold instead of heat. "Such warm blood," Johnny whispered. "I can feel it moving under your skin. It's been so long since I've tasted warm blood." I pulled harder, putting my whole body weight into it. Johnny didn't budge. His grip was like a steel clamp. "They built this place on cursed ground," he said. "Did you know that? Hundreds died here. Slaves mostly. Worked to death in the sugar fields. Beaten to death in the slave quarters. Hung from the oak trees." I yanked my arm again. "Nothing. Their blood soaked into the soil," Johnny continued. "And now that blood calls to us. Keeps us from resting. Keeps us hungry." "Let go of me," I screamed. This time Williams heard me. I saw her turn around at the end of the corridor. She started running back towards cell 23. Johnny's fingernails dug deeper into my wrist. I could feel them breaking the skin. Blood started running down my hand. "Yes," Johnny hissed. "That's what I need." "Russell!" Williams was shouting as she ran. "What's happening?" Dr. Morrison was right behind her, but he was older and couldn't keep up. Johnny leaned closer to the gap in the door. His black eyes reflected the fluorescent lights like mirrors. "I'm going to drain you dry," he whispered. "Every last drop. And then I'm going to do the same to your wife. What's her name? Rosie?" Ice shot through my veins. How did he know about Rosie? "That's right," Johnny said. "I know all about her. Pretty little thing. Works at the diner on Highway 10. Gets off work at 11 every night. Walks to her car alone in that dark parking lot." I pulled with everything I had. My shoulder felt like it might dislocate, but Johnny's grip didn't loosen. Williams reached the cell. "What's going on?" "He's got my arm," I shouted. "I can't get free." Williams grabbed my shoulders and pulled. Johnny just laughed, that grinding gravel laugh. "You can't help him," Johnny said to Williams. "Nobody can help him now." That's when Jim appeared. I heard his boots pounding down the corridor before I saw him. He was running full speed, carrying something in each hand. "Get back," he shouted. "Everyone get back." Williams let go of me and stepped away. Jim skidded to a stop next to the cell door. In his left hand he held a wooden cross. In his right hand was a small plastic bottle. He twisted the cap off the bottle and threw the liquid inside onto Johnny's arm. Johnny shrieked. The sound echoed through the entire cell block, bouncing off the concrete walls and metal doors. It didn't sound human. It sounded like a wild animal caught in a trap. His grip on my wrist disappeared instantly. I stumbled backward and almost fell. Johnny's arm jerked back through the gap. I could see smoke rising from where the liquid had hit his skin. Jim shoved his wooden cross through the gap. "Get back," he shouted. "Get back to whatever hole you crawled out of." Johnny scrambled away from the door. I could hear him moving around inside the cell, but I couldn't see him anymore. Jim slammed the food slot closed and turned the latch. The metal clanged shut. "What the hell was that?" Williams demanded. I looked down at my wrist. Red welts were forming where Johnny had grabbed me. They looked like burns, but they felt cold instead of hot. "Holy water," Jim said, holding up the empty bottle. "Blessed by Father Ray Pierce at St. Mary's. We keep bottles of it throughout the prison." "Holy water?" Williams stared at him. "Jim, what are you talking about?" Jim looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked at me, then back at Williams. "You know what I'm talking about," he said quietly. "You've always known." Williams didn't respond, but she didn't deny it either. "This place is cursed," Jim continued. "Bayou Correctional was built on plantation ground. Hundreds of people died here over the years. Slaves, mostly. Worked to death. Beaten to death. Murdered. I touched the welts on my wrist. They were already starting to blister. Something in the soil keeps them from resting peacefully," Jim said. "The dead don't stay dead here. They come back hungry, and they feed on the living." I wasn't ready for what came next, but the rules Jim gave me that first day, they kept me alive. The first time I broke Rule 1 happened 3 weeks later. I'd been working the evening shift when Martinez called in sick. Warden Williams needed someone to cover the midnight rounds in Block D, and I was the only guard available. "Just this once," she told me. "Stick to the main corridors and check in every 30 minutes. I should have said no. Should have remembered what Jim told me about never working alone after sunset. But I needed the overtime pay, and Williams made it sound routine. The prison felt different at night. Sounds carried farther. Shadows stretched longer. The fluorescent lights hummed louder, and some of them flickered on and off in patterns that didn't seem random. I was halfway through my first round when the lights in the east corridor started going out one by one, not all at once like a power failure. One fixture would die, then the next, moving toward me like something was walking underneath them. I backed away and radioed control. "We've got electrical problems in Block D East Corridor." Static answered me. I tried again. "Control, this is Russell. I need maintenance in Block D." More static. Then a voice I didn't recognize came through the speaker, low and scratchy, like someone talking through broken glass. "No one's coming, Bill." I turned off the radio and got out of there fast. Didn't stop until I reached the main desk where the overnight supervisor was reading a magazine. "Thought you were doing rounds," he said without looking up. "Electrical problems and Block D lights going out." He checked his board. "All green here. Must have been a temporary glitch." I didn't argue. But when I went back an hour later with backup, every light in that corridor was working fine. The other guard didn't see anything unusual, just me, jumpy over some flickering bulbs. But I knew what I'd seen, and I never worked alone after dark again. Rule 2 saved me from something worse. I was doing a head count in Block C when an inmate named Rodriguez waved me over to his cell. "Hey guard, Got a message for you. I kept walking. Jim's warning echoed in my head about refusing inmate message requests. Come on, man. Just need you to tell my cousin something when you get off work. I didn't respond. Didn't even look at him. It's important, Rodriguez called after me. Life or death, you know. Other inmates started paying attention. A few of them moved closer to their cell doors. The whole block got quiet in a way that made my skin crawl. Please, Rodriguez said. His voice changed, got softer, almost pleading. Just tell Maria I'm sorry. Tell her I never meant for it to happen. I stopped walking. Something about the way he said it made me turn around. Rodriguez was pressed against his cell door, both hands wrapped around the bars. His knuckles were white from gripping so tight, but his eyes were what got my attention. They were wet, tears running down his cheeks. She doesn't know, he whispered. Doesn't know I killed her. The other inmates were all watching now, dead silent, waiting to see what I'd do. I wanted to ask who Maria was, wanted to know what he was talking about. But Jim's voice was louder than my curiosity. I kept walking. Rodriguez screamed behind me. Not words, just a raw animal sound that bounced off the concrete walls. Then he started laughing, high-pitched and broken, like something had snapped inside his head. I radioed for backup. When Jim arrived 10 minutes later, Rodriguez was sitting quietly on his bunk, reading a magazine, calm as anything. What happened? Jim asked. Inmate tried to give me a message, got upset when I refused. Jim looked through Rodriguez's cell window. He seems fine now. Yeah, real fine. But Jim caught something in my voice. He pulled me aside after we finished the block. What did he want you to tell someone? I repeated what Rodriguez had said about Maria, about killing her. Jim's face went pale. Rodriguez doesn't have a cousin named Maria. His whole family's been dead for 15 years. Car accident. Then who was he talking about? Nothing good. Sometimes the dead use the living to send messages, things they want to confess, things they need to say before they can rest. You're saying a dead person was talking through him? I'm saying you did the right thing by walking away. Some messages aren't meant to be delivered. Rule 3 kept me out of cell block C during the worst hours. I learned that one the hard way, too. I was working a double shift when the overnight guard called in with food poisoning. Williams asked if I could cover until 6 a.m. The money was too good to pass up. Everything went smooth until about 1 in the morning. That's when I heard the singing. It started low, just a humming sound that could have been the ventilation system. But it got louder, turned into words I couldn't quite make out, coming from cell block C. I checked my watch, 1:15 a.m. The singing got clearer. A woman's voice, soft and sweet, sounded like a lullaby my grandmother used to sing when I was little. I walked toward block C without thinking. The yellow tape was still up, but the corridor wasn't locked, just blocked off. The singing pulled me forward, made me want to find whoever was making that beautiful sound. It reminded me of Rosie humming while she cooked dinner, peaceful and warm. I reached for the tape, then I remembered Jim's rule. Block C between midnight and 3 a.m. was off limits. I stopped, looked at my watch again, 1:25. The singing got louder, more insistent, like whoever was doing it knew I was there and wanted me to come closer. I backed away, went to the main desk and put on headphones, listened to the radio until 3 a.m. sharp. The singing stopped at exactly 3:01. Next morning, Jim found me at the desk looking like I'd seen a ghost. You heard it, didn't you? Heard what? The singing from Block C. I nodded. That's Sarah Dupuis. She was a slave on the plantation that used to be here. Worked in the big house kitchen. Master's son took a liking to her when she was 16. Jim sat down across from me. His hands were shaking a little. She fought him off for months. Then one night he cornered her in the pantry. When she screamed, the master came running. But instead of helping her, he held her down while his son finished what he started. Jesus. She hung herself from the oak tree out back 3 days later. But she doesn't rest easy. Between midnight and 3 a.m., she tries to lure guards into Block C, wants to tell someone what happened to her, wants justice. What happens if you go in there? She shows you, makes you see it all, every detail. Some guards never recover from that. Others... Jim trailed off. Others what? Others don't come back out. Rule 4 saved my sanity more times than I can count. The empty cells sang every night. Different voices, different songs. Some were hymns, others were work songs. A few were just wordless melodies that made you want to cry. The first time I heard it, I thought inmates were hiding somewhere, playing games. But when I checked the cells, they were all empty. Doors locked tight. No way anyone could be inside. Jim explained it later. The dead remember music. It's one of the last things that stays with them. They sing the songs they knew in life. Why? Comfort, maybe, or calling to each other. Hard to say. The singing never stopped completely, but I learned to ignore it. Treat it like background noise, radio static, something that was there but didn't matter. The worst was a little girl's voice singing "Ring Around the Rosie," high and sweet and innocent. That one almost broke me the first time I heard it. Jim found me crying at my post one night after that song played for 20 minutes straight. "Gets easier," he said. "Does it?" "No, but you get stronger." Rule 5 about the holy water became second nature fast. I checked my bottles at the start of every shift, made sure they were full, made sure the caps were tight. The water saved me more times than I want to remember. Spirits that got too close, inmates whose eyes went black during conversations, things that moved in the shadows when they shouldn't have been moving at all. I learned to spot the signs early. Temperature drops, electrical problems, that feeling like someone was watching you from behind. When those things happened, I had my hand on the holy water before I even thought about it. Jim taught me the right way to use it. Don't hesitate. Don't warn them. Just throw it and get back. The water burns them, but it doesn't kill them. Just sends them away for a while. How long? Depends. Sometimes minutes, sometimes hours. Never permanent. I went through a lot of holy water that first month. Father Pierce at St. Mary's started asking questions about why we needed so much. Jim told him we were blessing the cells. Pierce didn't buy it, but he kept providing the water anyway. "He knows," Jim said. "Priests always know when there's evil around, but he can't do anything about it except help us fight it." Rule 6 was the hardest to follow. Looking away when someone's eyes went black felt like the most unnatural thing in the world. Every instinct told you to keep watching, to figure out what was happening. But Jim was right about the danger. Eye contact with those things was like opening a door, giving them permission to get inside your head. I saw it happen to a guard named Peterson. New guy, started the same week as me. He didn't believe the rules any more than I had at first. We were doing evening rounds when we found an inmate named Jackson standing at his cell door. His eyes were solid black. No pupils, no iris, just empty darkness. "Don't look at him," I told Peterson. "Just keep walking." But Peterson stopped, stared right into those black eyes like he was hypnotized. Jackson smiled, started talking in a voice that wasn't his own, low and gravelly, with an accent I couldn't place. "You killed your brother," Jackson said to Peterson. "Drunk driving, wasn't supposed to be in the car that night." Peterson went white. "How do you know that?" "I know everything about you, Thomas. Every secret, every shame, every lie you tell yourself to sleep at night." I grabbed Peterson's arm. "Don't listen to him. We need to go." But Peterson couldn't look away. Jackson kept talking, describing things that made Peterson flinch like he was being hit. Personal things, family things, things no stranger should know. "Your wife blames you," Jackson continued. "She can't stand to look at you anymore. That's why she's sleeping with your best friend." Peterson made a choking sound, like someone had punched him in the throat. I threw holy water on Jackson without warning. He screamed and stumbled backward, his eyes returning to normal brown. The spell broke. Peterson collapsed against the wall, breathing hard, shaking. "Is it true?" I asked him later. "All of it, every word." Peterson quit the next day, never came back. Jim said it happened sometimes. The dead could see into people's souls, find their worst memories, and use them as weapons. "That's why you don't look," Jim explained. "Once they have your attention, they can dig into your mind, pull out things you'd rather forget." Rule 7 was the last one I learned, and the most important. It happened 6 weeks into the job. I was working the control room on a quiet Thursday afternoon when my radio crackled to life. "Bill, this is Jim. I need you to come to cell block A. We've got a situation." I started to respond. Then something made me stop. Jim's voice sounded right, but something felt wrong about the timing. He was supposed to be off duty, had left an hour ago. "Bill, did you copy? I need backup in Block A right away." I looked at my watch. 3:15 p.m. Jim's shift had ended at 2:30. "Bill, where are you? This is urgent." The voice was getting impatient. Still sounded like Jim, but there was an edge to it that didn't seem right. I remembered Rule 7. Trust your instincts. Instead of answering, I stayed put. Waited. 10 minutes later, the real Jim walked through the control room door carrying a cup of coffee. "Thought you went home," I said. "Did. Came back for my thermos." He looked around the room. "Why do you look like you've seen a ghost?" I told him about the radio calls, about the voice that sounded like him asking for backup. Jim's face went serious. "How long ago?" "Started about 10 minutes ago. Stopped when you walked in." Jim picked up the radio. "Control, this is Jim Thornton. Has anyone reported a situation in cell block A?" "Negative. All blocks are green." Jim set the radio down. "Something's been impersonating me, trying to get you alone." "For how long?" "Could have been going on for an hour, maybe longer." He sat down across from me. "If you'd gone to Block A, you would have been walking into a trap." "What kind of trap?" "The kind you don't walk out of." Jim explained that the dead could mimic voices, copy speech patterns, sound exactly like people you trusted. They use it to lure guards into isolated areas. Once they have you alone, they can do whatever they want. "How do you tell the difference?" "You listen to your gut. Something always feels off, even when the voice sounds perfect. The dead can copy words, but they can't copy souls." That's how I learned all 7 rules. Not from Jim's warnings, but from experience. From seeing what happened when you ignored them. From feeling the danger myself. The supernatural horrors became routine after a while, part of the job, like dealing with difficult inmates or broken equipment, something you worked around, but I stayed, despite everything I saw, despite the nightmares that started after my first week, despite the way my hands shook sometimes when I got home. The money was too good to walk away from. Bayou Correctional paid almost 3 times what I'd made in construction. With that salary, I paid off our credit cards in 2 months, caught up on the mortgage, started putting money aside for the kids' college funds. Rosie noticed the changes in our bank account before she noticed the changes in me. "Whatever they're paying you at that place, it's working," she said one evening while balancing our checkbook. "We might actually get ahead for once." I was sitting at the kitchen table, still in my uniform, still jumpy from my shift, still checking the shadows in the corners of the room. "Yeah, it's good money. You seem tired, though. More tired than when you were doing construction." I looked at her. Really looked. Rosie was smiling, but there was concern in her eyes. She'd been watching me more carefully lately, asking more questions. "Different kind of work," I said. "Takes some getting used to." "Must be stressful. You talk in your sleep now." "What do I say?" "Nothing I can understand. Just sounds upset." I didn't know how to explain that I was reliving my shifts in my dreams, seeing black eyes and hearing voices that weren't human, fighting things that shouldn't exist. "I'll adjust," I told her. Rosie reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "Just don't let the job change you too much. I like you the way you are." But the job was changing me, had to change me. You couldn't see the things I'd seen and stay the same person. I learned to hide it better, learned to smile when I got home, learned to talk about normal things like bills and weekend plans, learned to pretend that my biggest worry was overtime schedules instead of supernatural predators. Rosie never pushed for details about my work. She was happy with the financial security, happy that we could afford groceries without checking the bank balance first, happy that we weren't 3 months behind on everything anymore. She didn't need to know what I was trading for that security, didn't need to know that I came home exhausted because I spent 8 hours fighting for my sanity, didn't need to know that I jumped at sudden noises because I'd trained myself to expect attacks from things that shouldn't be real. The money made it worth it. At least that's what I told myself every morning when I put on the uniform and drove to Bayou Correctional. Some prices are worth paying, even when the cost is higher than you thought it would be. I stopped believing in coincidences after my first year at Bayou Correctional. The nightmares started around month 6. I'd wake up at 3 in the morning with sweat soaking through my shirt, seeing Tyler Watkins sitting on the edge of my bed. He'd look at me with those peaceful eyes and ask why I hadn't saved him. Sometimes it was Marcus Thompson standing in my bedroom doorway, blood trickling from his mouth. David Cruz would appear in my kitchen, pointing at the clock that always read 2 o'clock. Rosie would shake me awake and ask what was wrong. I'd tell her it was just work stress. She'd bring me water and rub my back until I fell asleep again. But the dead don't stay buried, even in dreams. The sounds got to me worse than the nightmares. Every creak in our old house made me reach for the holy water bottle I kept on my nightstand. The refrigerator humming would sound like voices whispering my name. Car doors slamming in the driveway sent me to the window to check for black eyes staring back at me. I couldn't watch TV anymore. Every shadow moving across the screen looked like something crawling out of cell block C. Every actor's eyes seemed too dark, too empty. I'd find myself checking Rosie's eyes when she wasn't looking, making sure they hadn't turned black while I was at work. The red welts on my wrist never healed right. 4 years later, they still looked fresh, angry red lines where Johnny Bradley's fingernails had dug in, with darker spots where his grip had been strongest. The skin stayed cold to the touch, like the temperature never came back after his ice-cold hand let go. Doctors couldn't explain it. I'd made up a story about a construction accident with some chemical burns. They prescribed creams and antibiotics, but nothing worked. The marks would fade for a few days, then come back darker than before. Sometimes I'd wake up and find them bleeding again, fresh blood on my sheets like Johnny had grabbed me in my sleep. Rosie worried about the scars. She'd trace them with her finger and ask if they hurt. I'd tell her they were fine, just taking time to heal. But late at night, when she was asleep, I'd catch myself scratching at them until they bled. The pain was the only thing that felt real anymore. I started checking locks obsessively. 3 times before bed, twice when I got home from work, once more before I left in the morning. The front door, back door, all the windows. Even the basement door that hadn't been opened in years. Rosie thought it was because of working in a prison, being around criminals all day. She wasn't wrong, but she didn't know what kind of criminals I was really dealing with. Shadows became my enemy. I'd installed motion lights around our house, bright enough to light up the whole yard. Every bush, every tree branch, every corner where something might hide. The neighbors complained about the glare, but I didn't care. Darkness was where they lived, where they waited. I stopped going out after sunset unless I had to. Grocery shopping happened on my days off, during daylight hours. No more evening movies or late dinners. Rosie wanted to know why I'd become such a homebody, but how do you explain that you've seen what happens when the sun goes down? The holy water bottles multiplied around our house like a security system. 1 in every room, 2 in the bedroom, 3 in the kitchen where I spent most of my time when I couldn't sleep. I told Rosie they were air fresheners. She believed me because she wanted to, because the alternative was admitting her husband was losing his mind. Jim kept me grounded those first 4 years. He'd check on me during shifts, making sure I was following the rules, making sure I wasn't cracking under the pressure. We'd eat lunch together in the break room, talking about normal things like football scores and weather forecasts. He never mentioned the supernatural stuff unless something happened, but his presence was enough to remind me I wasn't crazy. "You're doing good, Bill," he'd say after a particularly rough night. "Just stick to the rules and you'll be fine." He taught me tricks for dealing with the psychological pressure, how to compartmentalize the horror so it didn't follow me home, how to recognize when the stress was building up before it broke me, how to tell the difference between real threats and paranoia. "The job changes you," he'd said during my second year, "but it doesn't have to destroy you." I believed him because I had to, because without that hope, I would have walked away from the money and found some other way to pay the bills. The money was good, better than good. By year 3, we'd paid off all our credit cards and caught up on the mortgage. Rosie was talking about taking a vacation, maybe visiting her sister in Florida. The kids had college funds that were actually growing instead of shrinking. For the first time in years, we weren't living paycheck to paycheck, but the cost was higher than I'd expected. I aged 10 years and 4, gray hairs appearing faster than they should have, lines around my eyes from squinting into dark corners, checking for movement that shouldn't be there. My hands developed a tremor that got worse during night shifts, a constant reminder that my nerves were shot. Rosie noticed the changes but didn't know what to make of them. I'd catch her watching me sometimes, worry lines creasing her forehead. She'd ask if I was feeling okay, if maybe I should see a doctor. I'd tell her I was fine, just tired from the long hours. The truth was, I wasn't fine, but I wasn't ready to give up the security the job provided. We'd lived poor for too long, scraped by on construction wages that barely covered rent and groceries. Having money in the bank, being able to fix the car when it broke down without putting it on a credit card, that was worth something. Jim understood the trade-off better than anyone. He'd been making it for 12 years when I started, 15 years by the time I hit my 4th winter. The job had marked him too. Deep lines around his eyes, gray hair that had gone completely white, hands that shook when he thought nobody was looking. "Some prices are worth paying," he'd told me once. "Just got to make sure you know what you're buying with that price." I thought I knew. I thought I could handle whatever Bayou Correctional threw at me as long as I had Jim watching my back, teaching me the rules, making sure I didn't make any fatal mistakes. That's why December 15th, year 4, hit me like a truck. I arrived for my evening shift, same as always, parked in my usual spot between the rusted pickup and the dented sedan that had been there since my first day, clipped my holy water bottles to my belt, checked that my radio was working, walked through the metal detectors. The guard at the front desk was someone I didn't recognize, young guy, maybe 25, with nervous eyes and sweaty palms. New hires came and went so fast I'd stopped learning their names unless they lasted more than a month. "Where's Jim?" I asked. The kid looked at me like I'd spoken a foreign language. "Jim who?" "Jim Thornton. He's usually here by now." "I don't know any Jim Thornton." I figured the new guy just hadn't met everyone yet. Jim worked different shifts sometimes, covered for people when they called in sick. Maybe he was in Block D or handling some paperwork in the office. I made my rounds, expecting to run into him somewhere. Block A was quiet, inmates reading or playing cards. Block B had the usual evening routine, guys writing letters or watching the common room TV. Block C was taped off as always, yellow plastic barrier keeping everyone away from whatever was waiting in those empty cells. No sign of Jim anywhere. During my dinner break, I asked Martinez if he'd seen Jim that day. Martinez had been there almost as long as Jim, knew everybody who worked the facility. "Who?" Martinez said. "Jim Thornton, gray hair, about 5'9", carries the wooden cross." Martinez shook his head. "Don't know anybody by that name." A cold feeling started in my stomach and worked its way up to my chest. "Come on, Martinez. Jim's been here 15 years. He trained me when I started." "Bill, I've worked here 8 years. I know every guard who's been through this place in that time. There's no Jim Thornton." I tried Thompson next. He'd been around 6 years, worked with Jim on multiple shifts. Same response. Blank stare, no recognition, like I was talking about someone who'd never existed. Williams, the guard supervisor. Patterson, who worked weekends. Even Rodriguez from maintenance. Nobody knew Jim Thornton. Nobody had ever heard the name. The cold feeling turned into something close to panic. I went to the administrative office and asked to see employee records. The clerk, a woman named Janet, who'd processed my paperwork 4 years ago, pulled up the files on her computer. "Thornton Jim," she typed. "No results found. Check James. Maybe it's listed under his full name." She tried different spellings, different variations. James Thornton, Jimmy Thornton, Jay Thornton. Nothing came up in the system. "Are you sure you have the right name?" Janet asked. "Maybe you're thinking of someone from a different facility." I gave her Jim's description. Gray hair, tired eyes, wooden cross, always carried holy water. The man who'd trained me, who'd saved my life in cell 23 when Johnny Bradley tried to drain me dry. Janet shook her head. "I'm sorry, but I don't recognize that description, and I know everyone who works here." I walked back to my post, feeling like the ground was shifting under my feet. 4 years of conversations with Jim. 4 years of learning from him. 4 years of trusting him to keep me alive in this place. And now everyone was acting like he'd never existed. The holy water bottles on my belt felt heavier than usual. Jim had given me the first one, taught me how to use it, explained why it worked against the things that haunted Bayou Correctional. If Jim wasn't real, where had the holy water come from? I pulled out the folded paper with the 7 rules, the same paper Jim had handed me on my first day. The ink was still black, the creases still sharp from being folded and unfolded hundreds of times. The handwriting was Jim's, I was sure of it. Careful block letters spelling out the survival guide that had kept me alive. But if nobody remembered Jim, if there was no record of his employment, if he'd never officially existed, then who had written the rules? The radio crackled with the evening headcount announcement. I walked my assigned route, checking off inmates, making sure everyone was accounted for. But my mind was spinning, trying to make sense of what I'd learned. Maybe Jim had been using a fake name. Maybe he'd been working under the table, off the books somehow. But that didn't explain why nobody recognized his description, why a man who'd been there 15 years had left no trace behind. The alternative was worse. The alternative was that I'd been taking guidance from something that wasn't human, something that could appear real enough to fool me for 4 years but leave no evidence of its existence. I thought about all the times Jim had appeared exactly when I needed him. Cell 23 when Johnny Bradley had me trapped. The night I'd heard the singing from Block C, and Jim had found me the next morning, asking if I'd followed Rule 3. Every supernatural encounter I'd survived, Jim had been there to help or to explain what had happened afterward. Too convenient, too perfect, like something had been watching over me, protecting me, but not something from the world of the living. The shift ended at 11 p.m. I walked to the parking lot and sat in my car, staring at the empty space where Jim usually parked his old Ford pickup. The space was empty, but it looked like it had been empty for a long time. No oil stains, no worn spots in the gravel where tires had sat for years. I drove home with the radio off, windows up, doors locked. The red welts on my wrist were burning again, like they always did when I was scared. In the rearview mirror, I could see Bayou Correctional getting smaller, but the feeling of being watched never went away. Rosie was asleep when I got home. I sat at the kitchen table with a holy water bottle in my hands, turning it over and over, trying to figure out what was real and what wasn't. If Jim wasn't human, what did that make me? His student? His project? Something he'd been protecting for reasons I couldn't understand? The house creaked around me, old wood settling in the cold. Every sound made me look toward the shadows, expecting to see Jim standing there with his tired gray eyes and his wooden cross. expecting him to explain what was happening, to give me another rule to follow. But Jim was gone, and for the first time in 4 years I was completely alone with whatever was waiting in the dark. I sat in my car for another 20 minutes before I went inside. The parking lot looked the same as always. Rusted pickup, dented sedan, my Honda between them. But everything felt different now. The young guard at the front desk nodded when I walked through the metal detectors. Same guy who'd claimed he didn't know Jim. I clipped my holy water bottles to my belt and headed for William's office. Her door was open. She sat behind her desk reviewing paperwork, reading glasses perched on her nose. I knocked on the door frame. "Come in, Russell." She didn't look up from her papers. "Close the door behind you." I did what she said and took the chair across from her desk, the same chair I'd sat in 4 years ago when she'd hired me. Williams finished reading whatever document she had and set it aside. She removed her glasses and looked at me with those dark brown eyes. "You're resigning," she said. Not a question, a statement, like she'd been waiting for this conversation. "Yes, ma'am." I reached into my back pocket and pulled out the resignation letter I'd written the night before, 1 page, typed on Rosie's computer, simple and to the point. 2 weeks' notice, effective immediately. Williams took the letter and glanced at it without really reading. She folded it in half and placed it in a manila folder on her desk. "Any particular reason?" she asked. I thought about how to answer that. I could mention Jim's disappearance. I could talk about the nightmares and the scars on my wrist that wouldn't heal. I could explain how 4 years of supernatural encounters had changed me into someone I didn't recognize. "Personal reasons," I said instead. Williams nodded. She opened her desk drawer and pulled out a checkbook, the kind with carbon copies underneath each check. She started writing. "Your final paycheck," she said, filling in the amount, "includes unused vacation time and the sick days you never took." She tore the check from the book and handed it to me. I looked at the amount, more than I'd expected, enough to cover our bills for 2 months if we were careful. "Thank you," I said. "You did good work here, Russell." Williams leaned back in her chair. "Better than most. You followed the rules." The way she said it made me look at her more carefully. There was something in her voice, something that reminded me of Jim when he'd first handed me that folded paper. "You knew," I said, "about the rules, about what really happens here." Williams was quiet for a long moment. She picked up her glasses and cleaned them with a cloth from her desk drawer. "I've been warden here for 12 years, she said finally. "Before that, I was assistant warden for 6, 18 years total. You know how many guards I've hired in that time?" I shook my head. 237. She put her glasses back on. "You know how many lasted more than a year?" "No, ma'am." 41. You know how many lasted more than 3 years? I was starting to understand where this was going. "Not many. 7, including you." Williams opened another folder and flipped through some papers. "Most quit within the first month, some within the first week. A few just stopped showing up and never came back." She found the paper she was looking for and pulled it out, an employment record with my name at the top. "You worked here 4 years, 2 months, and 16 days. That puts you in the top 5 for longevity." She looked at me over her glasses. The rules helped, I imagine. My hand went automatically to my wallet where I kept the folded paper. "You know about them." "I know about a lot of things, Russell. This place has a history. The ground it sits on has a history. Some of that history doesn't stay buried like it should." William stood up and walked to the window behind her desk. She looked out at the exercise yard where inmates were walking the perimeter fence. "The state built this facility in 1978. Lowest bidder, quickest construction timeline. They knew about the plantation that used to be here. They knew about what happened on this land. But the price was right and the location was convenient." She turned back to face me. "First warden lasted 6 months. Second one lasted 2 years. I'm the 4th. My predecessors all left for the same reason you're leaving now." What reason is that? They realized some jobs aren't worth the money, no matter how much they pay you. Williams walked back to her desk and sat down. She pulled out another form and started filling it out. Exit interview paperwork, she explained. Standard procedure. Did you feel safe in your work environment? I almost laughed. Is that a serious question? It's a required question. I'll mark it as satisfactory. She made a check mark on the form. Did you receive adequate training for your position? I thought about Jim, about everything he'd taught me over 4 years, about how no one else remembered him. Yes, I said. Any complaints about management or co-workers? No. Williams finished the form and added it to my file. She closed the folder and placed it in a filing cabinet behind her desk. That's it then. She stood up and extended her hand. Good luck, Russell. I hope you find what you're looking for. I shook her hand. Her grip was firm and her skin was warm, normal, human. Can I ask you something? I said. Go ahead. The other guards who lasted a long time, what happened to them? Williams was quiet for a moment. She looked tired suddenly, older than her 50 years. Some transferred to other facilities. Some changed careers entirely. One became a priest. She paused. And one just disappeared. Never found out what happened to him. My blood went cold. When was that? Few years back. Good man. Experienced. Helped train new guards. Williams looked at me carefully. Name was Jim Thornton. The room felt like it was spinning. I gripped the edge of her desk to steady myself. You remember him, I said. Of course I remember him. He worked here for 12 years, best guard I ever had. Williams frowned. Why would you think I wouldn't remember Jim? I didn't know how to answer that. Yesterday, she'd acted like she'd never heard the name. Now she was talking about him like an old friend. I asked about him yesterday, I said. You acted like you didn't know who I was talking about. Williams stared at me for a long moment. Something shifted in her expression, a recognition of something she didn't want to acknowledge. Yesterday was a difficult day, she said finally. Sometimes this place affects people in ways they don't expect. She walked to her office door and opened it. Take care of yourself, Russell, and don't come back here, not even to visit. I stood up and walked to the door. William's eyes had that same tired look Jim's always carried, the look of someone who'd seen too much and carried too many secrets. The rules, I said. Where did they come from? Jim wrote them down, but they've been around longer than that, passed from one guard to another, probably been the same 7 rules since this place opened. And they work? You're still alive, aren't you? I walked out of her office and through the facility corridors for the last time, past the cell blocks where I'd spent 4 years learning to survive things that shouldn't exist, past the guard stations where I'd checked my holy water bottles and counted inmates, past cell block C with its yellow tape and its hungry dead. At the front desk, I turned in my radio and my temporary ID badge. The young guard processed my departure without looking up from his computer. Have a good day, he said. I walked through the metal detectors and out the front entrance. The Louisiana sun was bright and warm on my face. Normal. The parking lot looked like any other parking lot. The building behind me looked like any other government facility. But I knew what waited inside. I knew what walked those corridors after sunset. I knew what sang in the empty cells and what spoke through the inmates' voices. I got in my Honda and drove away from Bayou Correctional Facility. In my rearview mirror, I watched the building get smaller until it disappeared behind the trees. I didn't feel relief exactly, more like I was leaving part of myself behind, the part that had learned to survive in a world where the dead don't rest and the rules are the only thing keeping you alive. 3 weeks later, I found work with a trucking company out of Baton Rouge. The pay was less than half what I'd made at the prison, but it was honest work, clean work, the kind where the biggest danger was falling asleep at the wheel or hitting a deer on a dark highway. My first route took me from Louisiana to Texas and back. 3 days on the road, hauling auto parts to dealerships in Houston and Dallas. I liked the movement. I liked being somewhere different every night. I liked truck stops where nobody knew my name or asked questions about my previous job. The dispatcher, a woman named Carol with gray hair and a smoker's voice, handed me my paperwork and truck keys. "You ever drive long haul before?" she asked. "No, ma'am, but I'm a quick learner." Most of it's common sense. Keep your logbook current, check your load securement, don't speed through construction zones. She looked at me over her reading glasses. "You running from something?" "Why do you ask?" "Most guys your age don't leave a steady job to start over driving truck. Usually means they're running from something. Ex-wife, creditors, the law." I thought about how to answer that. "Just needed a change," I said. Carol nodded. "Fair enough. None of my business anyway. You keep your nose clean and deliver on time. We'll get along fine." The truck was a Peterbilt with a sleeper cab and 500,000 miles on the odometer. The previous driver had left an air freshener hanging from the mirror and a stack of country music CDs in the console. I adjusted the mirrors and the seat and started the engine. Driving helped. The constant movement, the changing scenery, the simple routine of checking mirrors and watching for traffic. It gave my mind something to focus on besides the memories of cell block C and the sound of singing from empty cells. At night, I parked at truck stops along the interstate, places with bright lights and security cameras and other drivers sleeping in their cabs nearby. I didn't like being alone in dark places anymore. Even after leaving the prison, some habits were hard to break. I kept Jim's rules in my wallet. The paper was getting more yellow and brittle with time. The ink was fading, but I couldn't bring myself to throw them away. They were the only proof I had that Jim Thornton had existed, that our 4 years together had been real. Sometimes, late at night in my sleeper cab, I'd take out the paper and read the 7 rules by the light of my phone. They still made sense. They still felt important, even if I didn't need them anymore. Never work alone after dark. Refuse all inmate message requests. Avoid cell block C between midnight and 3 a.m. Ignore singing from empty cells. Carry blessed holy water and check bottles every shift. Avoid eye contact with inmates whose eyes have turned completely black. Trust your instincts about dangerous situations. 7 rules that had kept me alive for 4 years, in a place where the dead walked and the living served their hunger. The red welts on my wrist were fading too. After 4 years of staying cold and occasionally bleeding fresh, they were finally starting to heal. The burn marks from Johnny Bradley's grip were becoming pale scars, barely visible unless you knew where to look. But on humid Louisiana nights, when the air was thick and still, they ached. A deep, bone-cold ache that reminded me of ice-cold fingers and black eyes and voices that promised to drain me dry. On those nights, I'd check the locks on my truck cab twice and keep the lights on until morning. Rosie noticed the change in our finances right away. The trucking job paid about half what the prison had, which meant we had to be careful with money again. No more eating out twice a week, no more impulse purchases at the grocery store. The college funds for the kids stopped growing as fast. But she also noticed other changes. I slept better. I stopped checking the locks on our house 5 times before bed. I didn't jump at every sound after sunset. The nightmares came less frequently. "You seem more like yourself," she said one morning over coffee. "More relaxed." "The road suits me," I said. "You miss the steady paycheck, though." "Some things are more important than money." Rosie looked at me with those green eyes that had first caught my attention 15 years ago. "You never did tell me what really happened at that place," she said. "Nothing worth talking about." "Must have been something. You aged 5 years in the time you worked there." I thought about Johnny Bradley's grip on my wrist, about Tyler Watkins and Marcus Thompson and David Cruz lying peaceful in their cells at 2 p.m. every day, about Sarah Dupuis singing her lullabies in the abandoned corridor, about Jim Thornton who'd saved my life and then vanished like he'd never existed. Just a stressful job, I said. Rosie nodded, but I could tell she didn't believe me. She knew there was more to the story, but she also knew I wasn't ready to tell it. Maybe I never would be. The trucking company kept me busy. 3 or 4 loads a week, mostly staying in the South. Louisiana to Texas, Louisiana to Mississippi, Louisiana to Arkansas. Familiar territory with familiar truck stops and familiar routes. I was good at the work. On-time deliveries, clean driving record, no complaints from customers. Carol started giving me the better runs, the ones that paid more per mile and had reasonable delivery schedules. "You're working out better than I expected," she told me after 6 months. "Most career changers don't last this long." "I'm not going anywhere," I said, and I meant it. The trucking life suited me. The constant movement helped keep the memories at bay. The simple, honest work felt clean after 4 years of supernatural encounters. The pay was enough to cover our bills if we were careful. But sometimes, driving through Louisiana on a humid night with fog rolling across the highway, I'd see things in my peripheral vision. Shapes moving in the darkness between the trees, faces in the rearview mirror that weren't there when I looked directly, voices on the CB radio that sounded like Jim Thornton calling my name. On those nights, I'd reach for my wallet and touch the folded paper with the 7 rules, a reminder that I'd survived 4 years in hell and come out the other side, a reminder that some knowledge once learned never leaves you. The scars on my wrist were almost invisible now, thin white lines that you'd miss unless you knew what to look for, but they still ached on humid nights, serving as permanent reminders of my encounter with forces beyond human understanding. I'd been driving trucks for 5 years now, same routine every week, pick up the load in Baton Rouge, haul it to Dallas or Houston or wherever the paperwork said, then drive back empty and do it all over again. The pay wasn't great, maybe a third of what I'd made at the prison, but I slept better at night. Most nights anyway. The Peterbilt had 700,000 miles on it now. Carol kept promising me a newer truck, but I'd gotten used to this one. The sleeper cab was small but clean, the engine still ran strong, and I knew every sound it made. After 5 years, we understood each other. I was driving north on I-55 through Mississippi, about 2 hours past Jackson, when I saw him the first time. Just a quick glimpse in the passenger side mirror as I passed a rest area. A lean figure standing under the fluorescent lights, one hand raised like he was waving. The image lasted maybe half a second before the angle changed and he was gone. Could have been anyone. Truckers stopped at rest areas all the time, but something about the way he stood, the way he'd raised his hand, reminded me of someone I used to know. I shook my head and focused on the road. It was past midnight, and I still had 3 hours to go before I could stop for my mandatory break. The interstate stretched out ahead of me, empty except for the occasional set of taillights in the distance. 20 minutes later, I caught another glimpse, this time in the driver's side mirror as I passed an overpass. Someone standing on the shoulder, arm raised in that same gesture. Too far away to make out any details, but the posture looked familiar. The way he held his shoulders, the angle of his head. I checked my speed and moved back to the right lane. Probably just tired eyes playing tricks on me. I'd been driving for 8 hours straight, and the white lines had a way of blurring together after a while, but I knew what I'd seen, or thought I'd seen. The third time was outside Grenada, Mississippi. I was pulling into a truck stop for fuel when I spotted him in my rearview mirror, standing next to the air pump about 50 yards behind me, watching my truck. The distance was too great to see his face clearly, but I could make out weathered hands and graying hair. My heart started beating faster. I parked at the diesel pumps and climbed down from the cab, but when I looked back toward the air pump, no one was there, just empty concrete under the harsh white lights. I filled the tank and went inside to pay. The clerk was a heavy woman with tired eyes who barely looked up when I handed her my credit card. "You see anyone else out there?" I asked. She glanced toward the windows. "Just you and that Kenworth over by the showers." "Why?" "Thought I saw someone by the air pump. Probably just a driver checking his tires." They come and go all night." I nodded and signed the receipt, but I'd looked at the air pump area for a full minute, and there hadn't been any other trucks parked nearby. No reason for anyone to be standing there. Back in the cab, I pulled out my wallet and touched the folded paper with the 7 rules. The ink had faded over the years, and the paper was yellow and brittle, but I could still make out the handwriting. Jim's handwriting, though no one at the prison remembered him writing it. I'd thought about throwing the paper away 100 times. It belonged to a part of my life I'd tried hard to forget. But something always stopped me. Maybe because it was the only proof I had that Jim Thornton had existed, the only evidence of those 4 years when I'd learned things no person should have to learn. The next sighting was in Tennessee, just south of Memphis. I was driving through a construction zone, down to one lane with concrete barriers on both sides, when I saw him in the passenger mirror, standing on top of the barriers, somehow keeping pace with my truck even though I was doing 45. He raised his hand in that familiar wave, and for just a second I could swear I saw his face clearly. Jim Thornton, older than I remembered, more weathered, but definitely him. The same tired gray eyes, the same lines around his mouth. He was wearing the corrections officer uniform, the one with the name tag and the radio clipped to his belt. I jerked the wheel slightly and the truck drifted toward the barrier before I corrected it. When I looked back in the mirror, he was gone. Just empty concrete and construction equipment. My hands were shaking. I pulled off at the next exit and parked in a McDonald's lot, engine idling. A few cars were scattered around the parking lot, but most of the lights were off inside the restaurant. I sat there for 10 minutes trying to convince myself I was seeing things, but I wasn't. I knew Jim's face, knew the way he moved. I'd worked alongside him for 4 years, learned everything I knew about surviving that place from him. Even if no one else remembered him, I did. The question was what he wanted, why he was showing himself to me now 5 years after I'd left the prison, 5 years after everyone had forgotten he existed. I drove the rest of the way to Memphis without any more sightings, delivered my load to a warehouse on the south side of the city, then found a truck stop to spend my mandatory rest period. I parked between 2 other rigs, locked the cab doors, and tried to get some sleep. But every time I closed my eyes, I saw Jim standing by the side of the road. That raised hand, that familiar wave, like he was trying to tell me something. The next few weeks passed without incident. I ran loads to Atlanta, Birmingham, Little Rock, normal routes, normal stops. I started to think maybe I'd imagined the whole thing. Stress, fatigue, too many years of looking over my shoulder. Then I saw him again outside Shreveport. I was driving west on I-20 about 30 miles from the Texas border when he appeared in my driver's side mirror, standing in a field next to the highway, arm raised in that same gesture. This time he was closer, maybe 20 yards from the roadway, and I got a good look at him. Definitely Jim, the same lean build, the same weathered hands, but something was different about him. He looked translucent, like I could see through him to the trees behind. I slowed down and pulled onto the shoulder, put the truck in park and climbed down from the cab. The field was empty except for tall grass and a few scattered oak trees. No sign of anyone, but I could feel him watching me. The same feeling I'd gotten at the prison when something was nearby. That prickle on the back of my neck, that sense of being observed by eyes I couldn't see. "Jim?" I called out. My voice sounded small in the open space. No answer. Just the sound of traffic passing on the interstate and the wind moving through the grass. I stood there for another minute, then climbed back into the truck. As I pulled back onto the highway, I whispered, "Thank you." I didn't know why I said it. The words just came out, like they'd been waiting years to be spoken. But as soon as I said them, the feeling of being watched faded. Whatever had been there was gone. Over the next few months, the sightings became more frequent. Jim would appear in my mirrors during long night drives, always at a distance, always with that raised hand. Sometimes he was standing by the roadside, sometimes on overpasses or in fields. Once I saw him in the parking lot of a truck stop in Arkansas, standing next to my trailer when I came out of the restaurant. I stopped being scared and started being grateful, because I was beginning to understand what was happening. Jim was still protecting me. Even after all these years, even after everyone had forgotten he existed, he was still watching out for me, making sure I stayed safe on these long, lonely highways. I remembered what he'd told me during my first week at the prison, about following the rules, about trusting my instincts, about how some knowledge, once learned, never leaves you. He'd spent 4 years teaching me how to survive in a place where the dead don't rest. Now he was making sure I stayed alive in the world beyond. The scars on my wrist had faded to thin white lines, barely visible unless you knew what to look for, but they still ached sometimes, especially on humid nights when the air felt thick and heavy. When that happened, I'd check the locks on my cab doors twice and keep the lights on until morning. I understood now that some experiences mark you permanently, not just on your body, but on your soul. The 4 years I'd spent at Bayou Correctional had changed me in ways that couldn't be undone. I'd seen things that most people would never believe, learned truths that couldn't be unlearned, but I'd also survived. I'd faced supernatural evil and lived to tell about it. I'd followed the rules Jim had given me, trusted his guidance, and made it out alive. That was worth something. That was worth everything. The prison had taken pieces of me I'd never get back. My peace of mind, my ability to sleep soundly, my faith that the world made sense. But it had also given me something valuable, the knowledge that I could face the impossible and survive. I was driving through Alabama on a foggy night in October when I saw Jim for the last time. He was standing on an overpass as I passed underneath, both hands raised now instead of just one. I could see him clearly in my rearview mirror, and for the first time in 5 years, he was smiling. I pulled over at the next exit and looked back, but the overpass was empty. The fog had lifted and I could see the entire structure clearly. No one there, but I understood the message. Jim's work was done. He'd watched over me for as long as I needed watching, and now it was time for him to move on. Time for both of us to move on. I reached for my wallet and pulled out the folded paper with the 7 rules. The ink was so faded now that some of the words were barely legible, and the paper was coming apart at the creases. But I could still read them if I held the paper up to the light. Never work alone after sunset. Refuse inmate message requests. Avoid cell block C between midnight and 3 a.m. Ignore singing from empty cells. Carry blessed holy water. Avoid eye contact with inmates whose eyes turn completely black. Trust your instincts. 7 rules that had kept me alive in hell. 7 rules written by a man who might have been human, might have been something else, but who'd cared enough to protect me when I needed protecting. I folded the paper carefully and put it back in my wallet. I'd carry it until the day I died, not because I needed the rules anymore, but because it was proof. Proof that Jim Thornton had existed, that he'd been real, that the 4 years we'd spent together had mattered. The highway stretched out ahead of me, empty and dark. I had 8 more hours to drive before I reached my destination. 8 more hours of white lines and truck stop coffee and the steady rumble of the diesel engine. But I wasn't afraid of the dark anymore. I'd learned that some protectors watch over you even after they're gone, that some bonds transcend death itself. Jim had taught me how to survive the supernatural, and now he'd taught me something else, that you're never truly alone if someone cares enough to watch over you. I put the truck in gear and pulled back onto the interstate. In my rearview mirror, the overpass disappeared into the darkness behind me. But I could feel Jim's presence one last time, a warm touch on my shoulder that lasted just a moment before fading away. "Thank you," I whispered again, and this time, I swear I heard him whisper back, "You're welcome, Bill. Drive safe." The road ahead was long and dark, but I wasn't afraid. I had my scars, my memories, and my rules. I had the knowledge that I'd faced the worst the world could offer and survived. And somewhere out there, in whatever place the dead go when their work is finished, Jim Thornton was finally at rest. I drove through the night toward another destination, carrying the fated rules in my wallet and the knowledge that I'd faced supernatural evil and lived to tell about it. I was alive, free, and moving forward with my life, even if the shadows of Bayou Correctional would never completely leave me.